Hi everyone, and welcome to my TED Talk. My name is Mr. Saffel, and today we are going to be discussing the hidden curriculum of sexuality in the American public educational system. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Sexuality, American public education system? The two together seems a little awkward, uncomfortable, and I just don't want to talk about it. This is really common if you are feeling this way about sexuality in the American public education system. Typically, in American culture, the idea of sex and sexuality is a very taboo topic, usually seen as an adult conversation, right? We tend to think that sex and sexuality is very discreet, private, personal, and sometimes consider it dirty. Whereas when we look at a public education system, we tend to see adolescence and the adolescent mind and how pure and innocent it is. And the idea of the two coming together is just a really awkward and uncomfortable mix. But what if I were to tell you that sexuality has been and continues to be taught in our public school systems, whether we realize it or not? So today I just really wanted to open the conversation, really try to relieve some of the discomfort and anxiety that gets brought up with sexuality in general, but particularly when we're talking about it inside the public school system. I just want to open the dialogue and create acknowledgement in hopes that we can create more research and do a little bit more investigations as to the effects of sexuality in the American public system. But before I begin, I want to talk about the implications that it has for a particular group of students, right? The queer student. So I want everyone to get into the mindset of your earliest childhood memories. Think back all the way to preschool or kindergarten. Did you or anyone you know at that time ever play house with maybe their crush? They got to be the mom or the dad. Maybe you had a play wedding where you exchanged vows and at the end you gave each other a hug and then everyone knew that those two were married. Or maybe we can think a little bit further, back to middle school. That awkward interaction of that middle school dance where the guys are on one side and the girls are on the other, and both of them really want to go and find their favorite crush, but the idea of rejection in such a social setting is just too much that you decide to play it cool with your friends. And then maybe even go further into looking at one of the most important nights for a high schooler, prom. You want to get glitzed up and glammed up, wear the best dress or tux in hopes that you impress your prom date, and maybe even continue a relationship outside of school, outside of high school. Did any of this ever happen to you? Well, I want you to understand that all of these are simply just exercises and practices for sexuality in the public education schools, in the American public educational system. Sexuality is being taught every single day, and every single month, and every single year. But typically, it's presented in a very heteronormative way, meaning that the normalized area is predominantly heterosexual or straight. It's common for people to go to prom with a male and a female. It's common for young kids to marry each other. It's common for, that awkward middle school dance, particularly if you are a heterosexual in today's society. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. These are important practices and exercises for our students to be able to work up into adulthood where they can have that adult conversation about sexuality. But there is a population of students that miss out on this opportunity to gain real-life interactions, right? To lose the idea of practicing sexuality, on how to flirt, on how to charm, and how to interact with a significant other. And that happens to be the queer student. So when we look at sexuality for the queer student, we don't see the same amount of interactions and access to opportunities as their straight counterparts. this can lead to a lot of social problems throughout that individual's life. They may feel very ashamed of who they are, and we could see low self-esteem levels throughout middle school all the way up into the adulthood. They're practically, by the time they reach to adulthood, where they get to have adult conversations, we tend to see that they're behind their peers, which can again cause a lot of social negativity and low self-esteem rates. According to the Trevor Project, which happens to be one of the largest LGBTQ youth resources, we see that LGBTQ students are roughly have a 3 times higher likelihood of contemplating suicide compared to their heterosexual counterparts. On top of that, queer students are more than 5 times likely to attempt suicide compared to their heterosexual counterparts. So if a student is being bullied at school for expressing their sexuality or wanting to practice their sexuality, just like the rest of their counterparts, yet they're also being bullied at home because the idea of sexuality is for grown-ups and young students don't understand what sexuality is, it can lead to a lot of problems, and it can lead to a lot of insecurities. And it's a huge learning obstacle that our queer students have to overcome. They're constantly in fight or flight mode, whether it be at school, at that awkward dance, at prom night, and then going home to an unwelcoming environment. That can be a huge learning impediment that can create a lot of problems throughout the student's life. But not only is the queer student at jeopardy, but the queer teacher is at jeopardy as well. So when you were in school, did you ever notice your teachers displaying sexuality? Perhaps you may have seen your teacher have a little portrait of their family on their desk, where you saw their husband or wife, you saw their kids, and maybe you saw their dog. And that's just normal, right? Or maybe it even went to a step further where you saw the spouse of your teacher and their children at school activities, such as, the school theater or at a football game or basketball game, etc. So yes, even teachers are teaching sexuality without even knowing it. It's really common and normal, and I think that it should be displayed, right? Teachers should be able to live their authentic life and express their love for their family. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's not always the case for queer teachers. The idea of sexual orientation and queer identity are actually not legally protected under discrimination for job employment. Title VII is the federal law which specifically lays out the foundation for employment discrimination. Areas such as race, ethnicity, sex, and national origin, all of these examples are demographics that are put into Title VII, which specifically say a person cannot be fired because of these specific qualities. However, if we were to look at Title VII, you will notice that there is no federal backing for sexual orientation and gender identity. Essentially meaning that queer teachers could be fired immediately just for being able to express who they are. Now, we already talked about the impact that queer students have if they don't have a role model or somebody that's in their corner. It can lead to the worst case scenario of suicide, right? And so by allowing queer teachers into our public systems, we create that alliance, we create that backbone, we create that safety net for our students who may fall through the cracks and actually attempt suicide. But if we have an institution that specifically targets teachers based on their sexual orientation and based on their gender identity, we are losing out on the opportunity to save a student's life. Now, public teachers can legally be fired for sharing too much of their lives. We've already seen this, and this is still, in fact, a relevant case. Even tomorrow, on October 8th, 2019, the Supreme Court is going to be looking at 3 cases based on the idea of individuals being fired because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. This is a current event that needs to be discussed, and we need to start talking about the implications that it has in our public school system. Now, we cannot ignore the population of students and teachers that are residing in our public school system. There is so little research that is being done on this population that it seems as if public educators are simply ignoring, on purpose, this specific group of students and teachers. And in order for the success of every student and teacher in public educational system, we need to adjust our classrooms to create an inclusive environment. There are many ways of which we can do this, but a couple just coming off the top of my head are providing resources for our queer students. Our queer students need to understand that you can have a successful life outside of a formal education, a public education. We also need to promote queer history in all areas of our curricula, not just in your history class, right? We need to include it in English, in mathematics, in science, in every single interdisciplinary subject that we have in our school. We need to create visibility for our queer students and show them that, yes, there are successful people who have contributed to society. And that's essentially what we want. We want every student to be able to contribute some form to their society and in a way that is authentic and them. And finally, we need to allow and support queer teachers to be open. The only way in which we can, degrade a stigma is to normalize it. Teachers need to be able to feel open and authentic, and that allows teachers to be able to teach at their best. It allows teachers to be able to connect with students in ways in which we never even thought about. So again, the only way to make sexuality less provocative and anxiety-ridden is to be able to have proper dialogues, to be able to allow everyone's voice to be heard, even if it does make you feel uncomfortable or anxious. Everyone's opinion matters, especially when we're talking about the livelihood of our students. We can create change and inclusion if we just continue to support research and back our teachers. If administrators back our queer teachers, then essentially we can make life a lot easier for our queer students and teachers every day. Thank you so much for coming to my TED Talk. It's been a pleasure, and I can't wait to continue this dialogue with you as we learn more and continue our research in the hidden curriculum of sexuality in the American public school system. Thank you and have a great day.